Hello, Tamara Buchan with Reclaim Initiative. I'm so excited about my new podcast series for Advent, a 4-week series with 4 different focuses. The title of this series is called Welcoming the King. We're pretty good at Christmas and Advent around focusing the newborn babe, come to Bethlehem, and that story. But in reality, there's a much bigger story around it. That baby disguised that a king had been born. And that king was a game changer. He's changed the trajectory of history. And he has the potential to radically shift your life as well. There's going to be 4 parts to this series, 1 for each week. And this week, we're going to be focusing on the emerging kingdom age. Things have shifted dramatically. I know that we're all struggling right now with everything that COVID has brought, but there's a reason that there's so much shift taking place right now, and we're going to be exploring that in the days to come. The second week's going to be focused on our identity, the identity God gives to us, and how we reclaim that identity and step out of the identities that haven't led us into great fruitfulness, fulfillment, and fun. You know, faith was meant to be fun, and I like to say, if it doesn't impact us on a daily basis, this lifestyle of living the kingdom, then why bother? But once you begin to live what is true, it happens, and life gets a whole lot more fun and a whole lot more fulfilling. The third week is entitled Generational Reclamation Freedom. You see, every family has a story, and they were meant to live in generational blessings. Just like Abraham, every family has been given blessings to live. But usually, we're so busy fighting what the ancestors who came before us opened the doors to, many things we have no idea about, that we never even get to discover what our generational blessings are. We're going to explore how to walk out those blessings and how to close the doors to the things that are sabotaging our lives. Sound good? And the 4th week is the Nativity week, where the newborn babe, aka the king, is born, and how those around him at that time recognized that he was the king, and how we can recognize, welcome, and worship him too. So, remember where you were on New Year's Eve of 2019. What were you looking forward to? Where was your focus? What was your dreams? Where were your goals for 2020? I remember a lot of people saying, 2020, the new decade, this is going to be the one. This is going to give us 2020 vision. It's going to be unlike no other. Well, we were right about that. It was unlike no other, but not in the way that we thought. Now remember March 11th, 2020. Do you remember what happened on that day? That was the day that COVID was named an international pandemic. And one by one, things began to shut down. Suddenly, we found ourselves grounded at home. The schools closed down. Businesses shut down. Churches shut down. Suddenly, Zoom became all the rage, because we had to have a way of connection that didn't include sitting next to people as we were in isolation and quarantine. There was a lot of inconvenience around that season. There was a lot of disequilibrium. There was a lot of big-time learning curves. But there was also some opportunities in it. We became less busy. We began to interact with the people in which we lived. We began to see blessings come to the land as pollution cleared up and as the sky became more beautiful, the stars more diamond sparkly. But as we've come out of that season a year and a half ago, moving close to 2 years, it's brought changes into our life that leave many of us reeling in constant disequilibrium, wondering what's going to hit us next. It's been challenging, to say the least. But when we understand what the bigger picture is, I like to call it the heavenly perspective, it helps us to understand why we're going through such a massive shift. Here's what I and others believe. I call it the Kingdom Age. Others call it different things, the Renaissance Age, many other names. But in reality, around every 500 years in history, things happen that are so monumental that life is never the same again. We can think back to the time of Jesus when he was born. That began a trajectory that put history on a whole new timeline. We even started the calendar over. And a few hundred years later, Christianity was no longer a sect of passionate people, but made the state religion. And that was a game changer that changed everything. A few hundred years later, things began to shift in the Great Schism, where there was a difference in how Christianity was walked out. And there was a time of great division and upheaval. In 1617, Martin Luther nailed his theses on the door of the Catholic Church. And at the same time, the printing press was developed. And that was a monumental moment where instead of masses being given in Latin, where the people couldn't even understand them, and religion was something that was reserved for only the greatest, most pious priests, and the other people just needed to come and do their part, suddenly the Bible could be in their own hands, in their own homes, and they could read it in their own language. There was a reform and there was an accessibility to the scriptures that was a game changer for how the rest of history played out. And we find ourselves just a little over 500 years later when COVID hit. And I believe it's one of the game changers that is speeding up the arrival of the Kingdom Age. Here's when I believe it began. And the things that you want to look for is global accessibility. You know, if you look at 500 years ago, faith became accessible because of the printing press, because of the reforms that took place due to Martin Luther's call. Well, in 1989, the internet was invented. Think about that before. You didn't have a cell phone. You had to go inside the bank. You didn't have answering machines. Nothing was automatic because we didn't have the technology. But the technology of the internet began to change everything. And then we had 9/11, which connected the world in a much greater way. Then we had the immersion of the smartphone, or the invention of it in 2007. And all of these are signposts of shifts that change our lives. Suddenly, people in the middle of Africa have a cell phone. I was in Cuba a few years ago, and their only outlet was to go to this one square where we were, where they could buy these internet cards and they could see what was happening around the world. Otherwise, they had no idea. Well, when people can be that connected, it changes everything. We become globally connected. We get news around the world in an instant. And it shifted how we've been able to relate with each other, both as individuals and as countries. globalism is something that is here to stay, and it's something that God is using to birth forth this kingdom. And when COVID hit and the quarantines came, I believe that God used that to give us a pause so that we could observe and also to begin to dismantle some of the current structures. Some of the current structures in just about every pillar of culture have come down or are in the process of coming down, so that the kingdom, the king and his kingdom age can fully birth and emerge. I taught a class a few times called New Strategies for New Seasons. I taught it in January and February of 2020. And I think on the very last class, it was the beginning of March, and I made this statement: there's going to become a moment where everything shifts, and you're going to know the kingdom has fully birthed. Who knew that I was talking about less than 2 weeks later that moment had arrived? Before we have our time together tomorrow, I just want to encourage you to spend some time thinking about how your life has shifted. Take a step back and think about what are the hard things that have happened as a result of COVID as a pandemic, and what are the things that have actually been a gift? And what are the things that you see deconstructing? And maybe ask God, why is that? What's your plan behind that? What do you intend to do with this shift? And we'll pick up from there tomorrow. Amen.